Thank you very much. I'm not going to repeat what I said before. so, it has been said, but it's self-evident that NATO was the most successful and the most powerful alliance in history. Everybody knows that. You don't have to argue about it. But I have to stress out that, yes, but the Cold War was not won on the battlefield. It was won on the economy and technology field. And this is important to understand, because NATO's contribution, which is something we neglect here in Greece, was to create this environment that allowed to the countries of the West to prosper and to have this economic and political development that gave them the lead, which ended up in the end of the war, on the Cold War. But sometimes success leads to complacency, and we became complacent. All this discussion about the peace dividend, all the belief that there is no peer, that now we're going to a world where we dominate and our ideas are dominating and everything is fine, so we don't need much defense to defend ourselves, proved out to be completely wrong. And there were some wake-up calls. For example, 2008, 2014, there were some wake-up calls. But we put the alarm clock on the snooze button. The last wake-up call with the invasion of Ukraine was a big one. Everybody woke up. But NATO, for Greece, I will come to more specifically the NATO relation with Greece, had always not a difficult question, relation in practice, but politically difficult relation. And there were 2 or 3 reasons for that. One reason was that some segments of the Greek society and political spectrum, mainly on the far right and on the left, were anti-Western or were seeing United States or NATO as the bad guys, the enemies. It was the part that NATO tolerated the Greek military junta from 67 to 74, which reduced the reliability of NATO as the alliance that supports some ideas and values for Greece. And it's the fact that Greece, unlike any other NATO country, at least this is the public perception, has its security threat inside NATO, not outside of NATO. And that changes completely the way you look at things. Nevertheless, Greece's economic and political development came by having its security guaranteed by NATO. The fact that Greece and Turkey were NATO members was what, to my mind, prevented all these tensions for 50 years to burst out into a full-scale war. Greece's participation in NATO and European Union allowed Greece to establish such a vibrant and good democracy after the 74. And Greece now is a very active member of NATO, participating in every aspect. So what about the future? The future is inherently unpredictable. And this is why we never should have been complacent. What is NATO? NATO is its values. Its values about human and political rights, its values about a rules-based international system, and so on. Since the future is unpredictable, we have to stick together to protect our values, because there are some threats that we know. For example, Russia, revisionism, China maybe. the axis of resistance or whatever you can call it, but there are always lurking some dangers who are not known. The unknown unknowns, to take the late Rumsfeld's word. So we have to be together to face the unknown unknowns and to protect our way of life and our value system. And the only alliance, no matter all this discussion, which is just bubbles in the air about European strategic autonomy or European, the only strategic alliance that can guarantee our way of life, the stability of Europe and the defense of Europe is NATO. NATO is indispensable for European security. If we enhance a European component inside NATO, that would be a good thing. But it's completely nonsense to discuss about a European army which will work independently of NATO. It cannot happen. Even if magically we could create such an army, that would be an army, for example, let's see history, like the army of Afghanistan, where different tribes with different tribal leaders, but with no cohesion, they were swept away without giving battle from the Taliban, or the army of Austro-Hungary in the First World War. There were Czechs, Hungarians, Austrians, Slovaks, but they couldn't even beat the Serbs, whatever. All the discussion about European security has to do mostly with a European defense industry, not with a European component. They struggle even to have an expeditionary force of 5,000 people. So the European security is based on NATO, and we have to understand that. Our way of life, our values, our value system is dependent on NATO. And we have to understand that in Europe. Lastly, I have to say that, of course, younger generations are excused to take all these values and ways of life as granted. But NATO and European Union, European community at the time, were founded on the wake of the Second World War to safeguard and defend exactly those values. And now we see that from the revisionism and the countries that they want to change the international system, these values are now under attack. So we have to go back to the basics. And one last word. NATO's biggest strength and biggest weakness is the participation of the United States. When you build a system in industrial development, what you don't want to have is to have a single point of failure. NATO has a single point of failure. And this single point of failure is if the United States leaves NATO. Then there is no NATO at all. NATO's strength is United States being involved. NATO's strength is United States Army. We have to understand that as well. Anyways, I want to conclude by saying that the future is inherently unpredictable. The future, history has shown, is producing constantly dangers for the securities. Societies that take their security for granted are condemned to be surprised by the events, and NATO is indispensable for our and for Europe's security. Thank you very much.